Good evening and welcome to Coach World TV. My name is Terry Yoffe, and tonight as my guest I have Jim Blue. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Terry. How are you?
I'm good,
Glad
thank
to be
you.
here.
Thank you. Me too. Jim is the CEO and owner of BlueTutor.com. He is a technology advisor, personal computer tutor, professional speaker, and the host of Keeping Technology Simple, a blog talk radio program. In other words, Jim's a technology guru.
Boy, that's a lot to put on my
You're
shoulders, Terry, at
very
the
right.
beginning.
You're very right.
Yeah.
And when we had dinner tonight, he is just amazing at everything he knows about this whole world of technology. And I'm actually going to turn it over to him so he can tell us where we are, what's going on, and what's the future for business people, anybody that wants to know. Jim.
Well, thank you. I have to tell you just at the outset that having spent so many years in corporate life before I got involved in the technology business, if I were out looking for a job, based on the skills that I had 30 years ago only, I'd really be in trouble because there's this great digital divide that exists out there, which you and I talked about at dinner.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah,
The digital divide reminds me of the continental divide. So what is exactly the digital divide, Jim?
Well, I guess that the simple explanation and what I try to do is I try to keep technology simple. I try to talk in plain English. But what it really means is that if you take baby boomers that were born between 1946 and 1964 and seniors, we are all on one side of that divide. We did not grow up in the world of technology.
Right, exactly.
And we're out there competing with the younger people that really grew up with it. I keep talking about all these younger people that are going to have carpal tunnel syndrome, the syndrome of the thumbs by the time they hit 30.
Right.
But the reality of it is that if you want to compete in today's world, whether you are in career transition, whether or not you just want to be able to be mobile, which we'll talk about in a little while, unless you've got the basic computer skills necessary to compete, you're going to have a hard time competing with these younger folks that are coming up that are acquiring information and communicating in a far different way than you and I did when we were out in the job market, and we both spent time in the corporate world.
That's so true. And, as a coach, I work with people a lot on transition. And certainly one of the things we talked about is they're older, the baby boomers. What I talk about is where are you in your technology skills? Because to be competitive with the younger people, either the millennials or some of the younger people, is very tough for this divide of people that are on the other side.
Well, to give you an example, I had an executive recruiter on my Blog Talk radio show several weeks ago, and we were talking about what the difference was between recruiting 20, 30 years ago and the difference now. And it's interesting because Andy mentioned to me that he used to have a research assistant working for him that did nothing but spend time on the phone, calling companies, finding out who the marketing director was, or the ad director was, etc. And now all he does is he goes to LinkedIn, and he just looks by company. He can look by whether it's a marketing person or whatever it happens to be, and the information is at the tip of his fingers, as opposed to waiting to do all this research, etc. That's just one example. A lot of my clients are in career transition, whether it's because of corporate downsizing, whether it's because they've left to start their own business, or they're forced to re-enter the job market. A lot of people have retired, or there are a lot of women, for instance, who had careers, stopped to have children, and want to go back. And the problem is that so much has happened since they were all looking for jobs, which could have been 10, 15, 20 years ago. And if you're using the same skills that you had then and applying it now, you're going to be behind the 8 ball.
That is so true. And I work with, as I said, a lot of people in transition. And I also know people in the recruiting business, and I did a talk about career transition. And when I spoke to the recruiter, one of the things she said is that today people have to learn the technology skills. They must be proficient at it. If they're not, they are, as you said, behind the eight ball and are least likely to be competitive and to get the job. They may be qualified in a lot of areas.
Absolutely
However,
right.
if they're not in this one, they may be overlooked.
And you know, it's interesting because some of the basic skills that I'm talking about is you'd be amazed at how many people, even in their 30s, that have come out of corporate life that have never answered their own email. They don't know how to file documents in the computer. It's amazing.
That's scary.
Well, it
especially
is scary.
in their 30s.
Well, because they haven't had to do it themselves.
They've had to. So now let's come to people in career transition who are downsized, right-sided, left-sided, and find themselves either, as you said, looking for work or deciding to become an entrepreneur. What's there for them? Can you give us some tidbits?
Well, I can give you plenty of tidbits.
Good.
Unfortunately, it's only a half-hour show.
Okay,
But
then
I
we'll
think-
take the most salient ones.
Okay, I think there are a couple of things that are important. First of all, people, you know, a lot of people who have left corporate life had an office. They had a
Right.
secretary, they had an assistant, etc. They even had a tech person. If something went wrong, they ring a button and say
Absolutely.
help.
Right.
Now you're at home. You know, and what do? You know, you
Right.
call your wife, you call your husband.
Yes, that's
You know,
exactly what I do.
You can do that. I can't do that.
My husband is a tech-savvy guy, so I do the exact same thing. I say, hey, can you come in and fix my machine?
Well, my
I
wife
mean-
does that to me all the time.
So-
but I think the important thing, though, to keep in mind is that, you know, operating at home with a person, just for personal purposes, is significantly different than setting your house up to have a business. And if you've been laid off or you're starting your own business, your funds are limited, and you're going to have to work at home. And the very first thing that I recommend to my clients is to take an inventory of what you have. See what
Okay.
type of computer you have. If you're sharing that computer with someone else in the house and you're trying to run a business,
Yeah.
that's not going to work. So the very first thing I say to people is I said you need to probably invest in at least a laptop computer. And you know, it's not like you're spending $2,000, $3,000, $4,000
Right,
anymore.
right.
You can get a state-of-the-art laptop computer for $500, $600 with all the bells and whistles, that type of thing as well. So that's real important. The other thing that's important is that you need to have your own space. You can't have a computer
On a kitchen
that's
table?
sitting on a kitchen table, exactly what I was going to say. You can't do that. Plus the fact, you know, you don't want it in any area of the house where there's traffic going on, because the last thing you want to do is to get a business call and someone saying that the laundry machine going on, something like that, or the dishwasher. So you need to
Right.
have your own space. You need to have your own computer. Now, the other thing that's important, which isn't going to cost you anything, is that, you know, most people coming out of corporate life had an email address. And now you're back home and you may have AOL, you may have Yahoo, you have Gmail. You need to have a second email account only for business purposes. Now my email address is jblue@bluetutor.com. The Blue Tutor is a domain name, the same way your company, whether it was IBM or whatever it was a domain name. So if you really want to get serious and run a business at home, you can register a domain name. And that's something, you know, we can talk about, you know, I answer many questions about that, but you should have a second email account, even if it's a second Gmail account.
Right.
You need to really have it so you can separate the business from the pleasure.
The personal.
The other thing is you really don't need to go out and get another phone line. Everybody has a cell phone. So I don't have a business phone at home. I use a cell phone. So why should I have to go out and spend money for another telephone number? I don't need it. But what you do need is a computer. What you probably might not need is a separate printer, because a lot of these printers are wireless.
Right.
You know,
Oh,
you can
wow.
have an endless number of computers sitting at home going into the same printer, that type of thing as
Right.
well. So it's not a big expense if you know where you have to put your money. Now, in terms of...
So let me stop.
Sorry.
No, that's all right.
That's okay,
I'm going
no,
to
please.
ask you.
I'll take a break, it's
question.
okay.
A question. A computer, which somebody needs. again, I'm not really tech savvy. I know what to do. You know, I have everything. Can somebody use an iPad instead of a computer, or is that a stretch, or a tablet?
It's a very good question. And despite what Steve Jobs said, tablets, which are wonderful, and I have clients now that have never used a computer that are using a tablet.
Okay.
But a tablet it really doesn't replace a computer.
Okay.
And the reason for that is that if you are writing a lot of documents or you're doing a lot of inputting into the computer,
Right.
into your, that you need to have, inputting it onto a tablet is extremely difficult. You can buy a keyboard that goes with it, but a tablet is really meant to communicate and to get information, whether it's the news, whether it's research information, when you're out and about.
Okay.
The thing that I like about the tablet is I don't even watch the news in the morning and the evening. I put on my tablet, I can go to any app I want to read the news, I can answer my emails, etc. I can go sit in a restaurant, I don't have to schlep a computer around with me. But it really is
Doesn't
not
replace.
a substitute
Okay.
for that.
Okay.
If you are in the business where all you really need to do is acquire information or communicate, it's a great tool. And as I said before, I've got a lot of clients that do nothing but communicate and look up information, whether it's the theater, whether it's a flight, you know, that type of
Yes.
thing as well. And a tablet's great for
I
that.
know, and it's, to me, mind-boggling what we can do with one of these tablets or iPads or whatever else. But getting back to the home office, I don't want to detract from that, because I think it's really important for people who have left the corporate world to understand what is needed to set up a home office, so they don't decide to get into a business and then look around and say, whoops, I'm missing A, B, C, and D.
Well, it's an excellent question. And the other thing is I'd like to mention is I've walked into houses where people, because they want to set up a business, have gone out and gotten a separate modem and a router because they want to separate what they do from a business standpoint from their personal life.
Right.
And the answer is you don't need to do that.
Great.
Okay? If you have a modem and you have a router, you can have, you know, an endless number of computers getting into the internet through that router. So there really isn't any reason to go out and spend more money than you're doing now. And the fact that it's a business as opposed to a personal, you know, activity, the router's the same. And unless you're going to bring in a string of 15, 20, 30 computers, that router that you've got for home can be used to use on your own computer the same way you would at home. And that's another cost savings. There's really a lot that doesn't, you know, have to spend a lot. That's the important thing.
I love all this information that you're giving us here. I mean, one, you can use your cell phone. You don't need, I have 3 phones. You know, 2, I have a business line, my coaching line, and a cell phone. And they're all serve different purposes. I have a computer which, you know, again, what you're saying, with a domain that speaks about what your business.
Coaching.
Mine is, you know, Terry at trycoaching.com, instead of saying Terry at AOL.com or Yahoo.com.
Not professional.
No,
Definitely not professional.
Not professional at all.